All right, welcome back to class. I think we had begun our discussion of the application of game theory in international relations, and we'd also started out with um, by building up a case concerning um, a very recent conflictual situation. So, just to recap some of the points and then get into the game itself, I thought it would be useful to start with one of the earlier slides that we had discussed, which was basically introducing us to the idea of game theory. Um, Based on whatever little discussion we had, it was evident that there is an element of interactive decision making when we are looking at building up any kind of game, right? And we are trying to understand game theory as some kind of an interactive decision theory that studies the behavior of decision makers in situations of strategic interdependence, right? So, when we talk of strategic interdependence, it's fairly evident that had it been the case that individual decision makers were in silos without worrying about how another state is going to sort of interface with them, then there isn't that much of a probabilistic approach we need in terms of what possibilities exist in decision making. Instead, it's fairly intuitive that only when it comes to strategic interdependence between states, we sort of arrive at these points wherein we need to predict other states' reactions, right? And by building up a game by itself, so if I were to build up a game relating to Israel and Iran without having exposure to IR theory, so if I didn't have the idea of what accumulation of military capability might be for, what the concept of rationality might be, rationality in terms of wanting to survive. Survival is the reason why states are rational actors, and if that is the goal, why would then they be pursuing some kind of military capability, etc., etc. So the point here is that without having exposure to theory, if I were to just build a 2 by 2 matrix, that by itself will not allow you any insight into what the actual issue might be, right? So therefore, the second point that I mentioned here, that one has to apply the theory to IR, because by itself a 2 by 2 matrix won't give you much insight into what exactly is being discussed. And the third introductory point that we touched upon was that in case one thinks that is it only in cases where there is maximization of power, where there is security competition, where there is some kind of um, zero sum kind of self interest involved, is it only in those cases that game theory is useful? Again, this is not the case, as we shall see. We will sort of discuss games that help us understand why it is difficult to sort of bring to signature a plan that maybe helps in alleviation of environmental conditions, right? Why is it difficult to make everybody come to the discussion table and make them sign an agreement saying that pollution is bad and therefore I should sort of be part of some measures to mitigate the concerned condition. Games are also applied in instances where we have not just competition, but also maybe a serious conflict of interest. How would states then behave, right? If it is a competitive kind of a situation, there would be some kind of an approach. If it is a situation where there is a serious conflict of interest, something that involves, say, a territorial dispute, for example, how would states behave? So I've given you a flavor as to the kind of scenarios and of course, much beyond this, the kind of scenarios where game theory actually proves to be useful. And where we had left at the last time around was trying to sort of construct um, the recent instance where we find the build up of very serious tensions between Iran and Israel, right? And if we were to sort of look at the options that we had identified for both states, I think in terms of a basic um, exposure to the kind of relationship both countries have had, we had discussed how there is a certain pursuit of a nuclear weapons program that Iran has been indulging in. So the choices that it has would be either to stop the nuclear weapons program or to sort of continue with it, right? And we had discussed that as far as Israel is concerned, given the fact that Iran has a stated position that it would want to wipe out Israel from the face of the earth, it's also a question of survival, and states being rational actors would want to ensure their survival. And going by that, the options that Israel has was, as we had discussed the last time around, either get into a attack scenario or not attack the other state, right? Now, in terms of maybe we begin with um, an ordinal ranking of preferences. So, say for example, um, if we were to just sort of rank something sequentially, where the number itself doesn't have much of a weight except for the fact that it's just a sequential ranking. If this was the ranking that one foresees, then in terms of Iran's preferences, it would be sort of fair enough to suggest that Iran would want to pursue a strategy where it continues to develop nuclear weapons uh, and does not get attacked by Israel. Because ideally, that is the situation that Iran would be looking forward to, that it continues to develop its nuclear weapons and does not get attacked. So, if we take that as the preference ranking that Iran chooses, and then look at the next best alternative that is available to Iran, it would be again the fact that it would want to continue developing nuclear weapons, but in this particular case the other option is that only it gets attacked by the Israelis. So I think it would then be fair enough to assume that it uh, prefers to um, sort of continue its nuclear weapons program and gets attacked. Again, the next ranking, intuitively, as we had also discussed when we opened up discussions on this particular issue, was that um, out of the two choices, the fact that if it has to stop developing nuclear weapons, it would rather stop at a time when it does not face catastrophic attack, because once you face catastrophic attack, there are several aspects to it, right? It sort of pushes back your economy by a decent number of years. B, the amount of scientific acumen that you must have accumulated till that particular point in time, whether it is engineers, whether it is other scientific personnel, whether it is plants, whether it is sites, and all of that, you don't want the entire thing to be wiped out in a manner that sets you back, that sets your entire program relating to scientific research back by at least a decade or so, right? So that would be the worst kind of outcome that you are foreseeing. Instead of that, I mean, you would rather that the thing stops and you at least don't have to face the attack. So then you don't have to face a serious kind of disruption to economic activity. Of course, there is loss of lives involved. Of course, you know, if you are faced with an attack, civilians get killed, not just your scientific personnel. So in terms of the least preferred outcome, it would be the option that it has to sort of stop getting attacked by Israel, and therefore we sort of have some sort of an understanding on the preference ranking that Iran might have, that it chooses outcome 4 over outcome 3 over outcome 2 and outcome 1. If I were to sort of keep Israel's preference rankings in place, what would Israel prefer? If I were to sort of open it up for discussion, what would Israel prefer in this particular scenario? So Israel would want to achieve its objectives. It's clearly in favor of wanting to stop Iran from pursuing nuclear weapons, right? Because that's completely antithetical to its own existence. So it's very clear that you are looking at, you know, the option along the stop row. So within the stop row, I'd prefer that the other guy stops their nuclear weapons program without me attacking. Why? For many reasons. The fact that I contemplate attack means that I'm engaging personnel, I'm engaging resources, I'm running the risk of also bringing my international reputation into question. There are many other factors that are involved, and mind you, even an attack sets me back by, you know, a couple of years in terms of the kind of resources that might be spent in any wartime kind of operation. So it's very clear that, you know, Israel would have a preference for the option 2 over 1, and of course if the Iranians continue, I mean the other ordering of preference for Israel, 4, yeah, and then 3, for the obvious reason that I would keep 3 as my last preference, because in the event of me attacking my adversary and that not working out, that, you know, the adversary continues their nuclear weapons program, there is a very serious reputational cost to even the kind of strategies I have been employing. So whatever military might I might be having, whatever might be my heft in international politics, frankly all of that gets put to rest if, you know, the adversary continues with their nuclear weapons program in the event of my attack, and therefore you sort of look at the payoffs in this manner. So if I were to sort of change these preference rankings into some kind of cardinal numbers as in again assigning weights, it is very interesting that for Israel the best option is that it doesn't attack and the adversary stops, right? Followed by the fact that it attacks and you have to make the adversary stop, followed by the fact that if I attack and the adversary continues with their nuclear weapons program, then that brings in to serious question all of the military might and posturing and heft that I was carrying, right? So when you define the game in this manner, now having assigned a set of cardinal weights, right? Now it's no longer about preference rankings but assigning actual weights, right? Now what we have done is basically assign the proper weight to a particular choice. So if Iran decides to continue their nuclear weapons program and it doesn't get attacked, it has a weightage of 4, which in terms of the weight itself reflects the particular choice. If Israel, it doesn't attack and makes Iran stop its nuclear weapons program, it has a weightage of 4. Again, the right hand column reflects Israel's payoffs, right? Cardinal numbers. The left hand side reflects Iran's payoffs, right? That is the cardinal weights that we have assigned. So if I were to then move to the next stage of decision making, I would then see that in terms of an attack strategy compared with a do not attack strategy, now that I have assigned cardinal weights and actual numbers, it's very clear that my payoff is higher if I choose a strategy of do not attack, me being Israel. Fair enough? I mean, it's fairly obvious. There's not much discussion involved. And if I were to sort of look at Iran and try and assess what might be the best set of payoffs accruing to me, then given the fact that the left hand side adds up to a 3 and here it adds up to a 7, it's fairly evident that Iran would prefer the strategy to continue at all times. So if we were to arrive at some kind of an equilibrium that this game produces, it's very clear that it produces an equilibrium where the payoff is 4 and 2, and that is where you have the outcome represented by do not attack and continue. And the good thing about applying IR theory to an actual scenario is that when you actually look at this game playing out, right, now that we are in the month of August and we possibly saw the last couple of months revealing what exactly went on in the minds of decision makers, possibly sitting in Tehran and Tel Aviv, it's fairly evident that at some level the discussion that we hear today is that, well, the mountains may have been bombed in Iran, but the nuclear program still continues. And the other side that we hear is that Israel did not go in for an all-out kind of an attack, right? Although it sort of targeted select installations, etc., it did not declare war per se and go in for an all-out kind of an attack. So what we see playing out in recent months, in a way, gets corroborated when we sort of identify the set of payoffs that one can assign to a game that helps us understand bilateral relations and decision making in scenarios of strategic interdependence with much more clarity, right? So let me see if I have missed out on anything. We had previously used ordinal rankings just to see what sort of outcomes are preferable. So we had seen that Iran wants to continue with its nuclear weapons program, which is why the bottom row is preferred over the top row basically having outcome 1 and outcome 2. We had seen that Israel prefers the fact that it has Iran stopping its nuclear weapons program. So therefore, it prefers outcome 1 and 2 over outcome 3 and 4, 3 and 4 being instances when Iran continues, and therefore we had arrived at ordinal rankings. We then went on to assign weights that actually describe these choices, and as I mentioned, just for you to construct similar games with other bilateral issues. I mean, if I were to construct a game between India and Pakistan, pretty much I would be able to sort of define it with the same intuitive logic, right? So ultimately, the equilibrium that we arrive at is the intersection, as we saw, of continue and do not attack. So you end up in the last quadrant with a payoff of 4 and 2. which basically reveals the best outcome that is there in this particular um, game, right? Let me then go on to another game which is oftentimes applied in international relations, and this is a very interesting game of the prisoner's dilemma. Um, the prisoner's dilemma, in terms of a very simple explanation, say for example, there are two thieves who have undertaken some kind of robbery, some kind of theft at maybe the SBI branch here next to Gajendra Circle, right? Now, the prosecutor has to prove that offense, right? And the only evidence he has is that he found two guys loitering around SBI premises, right? So the minimum charge that he can actually implicate them for would be for wrongful entry or trespassing. That's the minimum charge that he can implicate them for, because he just caught them in that premises. Of course, I mean, it's not necessary that with that you can sort of establish charges of theft or robbery, and that is too far the case. It won't stand in a court of law. And so he decides to offer them a couple of choices in order to prove his case, right? So the prosecutor tells them that and then he interviews both of them in separate rooms, right? Because he wants to get a confession out of them, right? If he gets a confession out of these guys, certainly they are going to sort of go to jail, yeah, but the punishment can be relaxed because it's some sort of a plea bargain, right? If somebody is confessing that, okay, I'm sorry, I've committed this offense, then normally, in law, they won't apply the highest punishment which is there. They would say that, at least the guy has admitted. So it's only when somebody is recalcitrant, that he's saying that I haven't done it, and it's proven that he has done it, then he gets the highest punishment. So that's how law works, right? There is that, I don't know, carrot and stick kind of an approach as well, in that if you admit your fault, then you're most likely that, the other person, being fair, would say that, okay, I can't let you off, right? You've admitted your fault, I can't let you off. So of course you have a punishment, but it won't be as extreme as the case I catch you for something which is wrong, right? So this is the scenario before two of them who've been arrested. Like I said, bear in mind, the minimal charge that he can have on both of them is maybe wrongful entry or trespassing. That will have whatever is the punishment. The actual offense is a more serious offense. While getting interviewed by the prosecutor, each prisoner has the following in mind. There is one option wherein I can say that I haven't done it. I just accidentally happened to be, near that premises, but I actually saw the other person commit that particular offense, right? Now just keep in mind, these are three different sets of payoffs that I've just described, right? One is where both of them say that, sorry, we did it, and therefore, of course, they face punishment, but not the highest, the secondary punishment. The other is wherein one of them decides that he would say, well, I was not involved, the other guy was involved, in which case the other guy is going to get the highest punishment, right? Not the second punishment, but the highest punishment, because he himself has not sort of told the prosecutor that he was involved. And the third option is where both of them tell the prosecutor, stop torturing us, we were just taking a walk in KV grounds, you just happened to catch us when we were right next to the SBI gate, and that doesn't mean much in terms of the offense that you're charging us for, right? So very clearly, if I have to sort of define this game, and let me see if we can move back to, or maybe we have the payoffs listed here. It might be simpler that ways, right? Okay, let me see if the game is defined in the manner that we just discussed. So basically, again, pretty much along the same lines that we had discussed. Um, there are different inducements that the prosecutor wants to give to the two criminals, right? So he would say that, if you confess and admit that, this is what we had done, I am willing to drop off the charges. And the guy knows that, that is the likely option, um, that allows him to get away with um, lesser punishment. The other option he would use to sort of pressurize the suspect would be to say that, the other guy who's being interviewed in the other room, he's already given a testimony against you, and therefore, if you don't confess, then I'll make sure that you end up in prison for the longest amount of time, right? That's again fair enough. If neither of them confesses, they are pretty thick friends, just like many of the friends sitting here, right, who would sort of vouch for, yes, my friend was there in class, please give him attendance and all of that. If neither of them confesses, then of course they have to face the minimum punishment that I mentioned for trespassing or wrongful entry. And then the last option is that, both of them, they sort of squeal on each other and end up facing um, a certain amount of punishment because they squealed on each other, right? So if we were to sort of look at how, and again, I think here there is an issue with right, I think there is something here which is not working. But anyhow, let's go to one of the earlier slides. I'll just explain what this is. Right. So basically, I think there was something wrong with the slide, uh, in that the matrix was not showing, it was just overlapping with some text. But I think we'll go through the payoffs in this manner. So supposing both prisoners, they are very thick friends and they decide to cooperate, that, we will not squeal. Whatever he does, right? Um, just make sure you tell him that, it's a case of mistaken identity and there is no way you can charge us for a serious offense. And finally, of course, as a result of that, even though they are denying culpability, as I mentioned, the fact of the matter is that they still have to face a little bit of punishment, because there is a charge for trespassing and unlawful entry, which is anyway chargeable by whatever is the punishment, right? The other option, when you look at the second quadrant, and again bear in mind, continuing with our earlier game, you look at prisoner 1 payoffs by looking at the left hand side, and you look at prisoner 2 payoffs by looking at the right hand side. within any quadrant. If you have a scenario wherein um, both of them were to squeal, right? Both of them were to squeal, in that both of them would say that, well, it's not me who's done the offense, it's the other guy who's done the offense, and the other guy also decides that, I can't trust this particular person. I mean, he might say that, I was not involved, and then he will sort of make me go to jail for a longer period of time. When both of them squeal, they in fact end up getting 3 years of prison term. So the number here basically reflects the longer prison sentences, right? So if you have a scenario wherein the prisoner 2 is defecting by not agreeing to the crime and saying that, well, I was not involved and it was only the first guy who was involved, the first guy will go in for 5 years, right? That's the maximum punishment he'll go in for. Similarly, if prisoner 1 defects in this particular scenario, you look at column 1, the bottom option of defecting by prisoner 1 and cooperation by prisoner 2. The fact is that the defect strategy ends up getting prisoner 1 0 years in prison, but the other guy would go in for a longer term. Now, the question is that when this game is only being played once, right? It is not an iterated game, because the guys are being interviewed in 2 separate rooms. They don't have the option to discuss with each other. They don't have the option to strategize together, right? It's almost as if there is no question of any communication possible between both of them. Game theory suggests, and particularly Prisoner's Dilemma suggests, that in every such game, the choice or the Nash equilibrium, the equilibrium that allows a particular party to have a better outcome, irrespective of what the other guy decides, at every instance it will come to a defect strategy. It's a very interesting way of how international relations work. And I'll give you an example so that you understand how this payoff. You've understood the payoffs, how it works in terms of building up the game, in terms of a 2-player prisoner kind of a scenario. But if I were to replace these 2 prisoners by any 2 states who are in the international system and are pursuing an arms race, that is when you are able to see the beauty of this game actually being implemented. So how does an arms race work? An arms race can work if, for example, look at the period of the Cold War. Had it been the case that the game was being iterated, they had a lot of opportunity to build trust, to communicate with each other. The 2 countries who were at the opposite camps, as it were, during the period of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union, given the fact that there was hardly any trust, there was hardly any interaction, there was hardly any mutual communication happening between the 2, it was very evident that for both of them, in their mind, no matter how much you told them that why don't you pursue some strategy to maybe sign some kind of an arms agreement, right? That we will not, say, have a nuclear arsenal of more than, say, 50 nuclear warheads, and then after that we'll completely stop developing the weapons program. The moment you give them that option, the US would not think that the other guy will also cooperate and also be willing to put a cap on their military program. Had they agreed to that, they would have had the outcome of -1, which is the least punishment. I mean, like, pursuing nuclear weapons anyway involves costs. Why? Because, any economy, if you're looking at it in terms of, a pie, then there is only that much that you can carve out for education. There is that much you can carve out for welfare related expenses. There is that much you can carve out for defense, etc. Now, If you are having a bigger chunk of defense expenditure and you want to maintain, a big stockpile of nuclear weapons, of course that is coming at a cost of crowding out other investments which you could have made to develop your economy, to create jobs, etc. That's a choice that states would make day in and day out, right? But even though that would have been the better pursuit, the fact that they could have not invested so much of money on wastefully accumulating military capability, even though that is the scenario, they would never land up in that kind of a situation which sort of allows them to get away with a lesser punishment. And instead, what happens is each person uh, assumes that, well, the other guy will defect. If the other guy defects, I end up with a 5-year jail term, and therefore the best option for me also is to simply defect. And that's why you have a scenario where you end up with a defect kind of an outcome. That basically is the Nash equilibrium, because if the other guy chooses um, um, any other strategy, he would still be worse off, right? So defect is the ultimate strategy that this game sort of ends up being. Of course, there are those who sort of define this game um, by suggesting that had this game been open for iterated play, then you would have got the best outcome which is possible. In which case, both of them would have reasonably gotten away with a much lesser punishment, right? So it's very interesting that you find a real world scenario relating to an arms race very beautifully being exemplified in this particular case. If you were to ask, are there other scenarios where you can apply this? Um, there is, say for example, if I want to keep my streets clean, and if you have a scenario where every person thinks that anyway the other guy is going to litter on the street, there's no point in me taking all that effort to make sure that my uh, plastics and my biodegradable and all of that is sorted out. And why should I do all of that, because the rest of them will anyway be pursuing. With that kind of an assumption, you will always end up having a situation where the streets might end up looking um, quite unmanageable, right? But when it's iterated, when you have like repeated campaigns where people are sort of encouraged to do all that, left to themselves you will have a dirty street. But iterated, repeated behavior of interaction would then produce the outcome that that, okay, fine, if everybody is contributing to the effort, then you can apply this game also in case of a cartel and the way a cartel operates, right? So normally, how would a cartel operate? Say if I am an oil cartel, I would reach an agreement between the top 2-3 players saying that let's not produce more barrels of oil and introduce it in the market, right? That agreement is very sacrosanct, because if I introduce more supply, then greater supply means the price will come down. As long as there is that restriction of supply, you can ensure that the price can be maintained, and I can sort of shave off a larger share of the profit. But usually what happens is that there is a temptation to defect, and some guy will defect and therefore end up creating a worse off kind of an outcome. um, I think the application of the prisoner's game to these scenarios, whether it's an arms race, whether it is about common goods, whether it is about a cartel, etc., I think it gives us a fair bit of insight as to what kind of outcomes can be expected in games which are not iterated. These are one-off kind of games, etc., right? Now, can there be other kinds of games? I think we we might just give a brief intro to the next game before we open up for full discussion, because I think that would be a very interesting kind of a contrast, right? So the next game is the game of Stag Hunt, right? Now, Stag Hunt was defined as a game wherein you have two hunters. They have the option to cooperate and hunt for a stag. Stag, as you know, is a much bigger animal, right? Sorry. Stag is a much bigger animal, and the way this game was built on the logic that it's very difficult to catch a stag alone, right? The animal is unwieldy, it's a bigger animal, right? I mean, intuitively, you know that, one guy running after a stag, it's going to be difficult. Not that, two hunters running after a stag will make it any easier, but intuitively, it's a much more difficult animal to catch. At the same time, it's a much more um, filling animal, right? In the sense that if you are able to hunt the stag, it assures you food supply for a couple of days, right? The other option is a rabbit. Intuitively, rabbit might be easier to catch, but then if you end up catching a rabbit, it might just be good enough for 1 or 2 meals, right? In this scenario, when we look at a game being defined, it is fairly evident that the highest payoff would be associated with um, both hunters deciding to coordinate their actions, both hunters going together, working together, and making sure that they are able to get hold of the rabbit. If the second hunter feels, and the second hunter, you look at the right hand side, if the second hunter feels that it's a big thing to go chase a stag the whole day, might as well just use half an hour, 40 minutes to get hold of a rabbit, and I'm good with that. And certainly he ends up with a payoff of, say, 6, just a notional number for now, or maybe even smaller, right? Certainly not anywhere closer to what the stag would be, but if hunter 2 decides to run and chase the rabbit, he gets the rabbit, which is a smaller meal, and the other guy, of course, ends up not getting anything, or even for the sake of argumentation, even if he gets the minuscule kind of a thing, whatever he might be after. So therefore you have a similar scenario here. If this guy decides that I will chase a rabbit and make sure that I at least feed myself for 2 meals, I won't bother about going after the stag, etc. This is the payoff, how it will appear. And if both of them decide that we don't really care about cooperating on catching the stag, it doesn't make much sense, let's go our own ways. And even if they end up cooperating to catch a rabbit, of course, rabbit being smaller, and then after that you have to share, then very clearly it's not like the full 5 you get to enjoy, right? You end up sharing, right? And this makes the game pretty interesting. Why? Because this is the sort of game where if you decide to cooperate, you can really enjoy 4 days of no work and fantastic meal if you decide to cooperate. Now, what could be a scenario where you decide to cooperate and the good payoff associated with it? Say, for example, if I say that, let us work towards environmental conservation, right? And the payoffs would be several. You have a better standard of living, your costs for healthcare go down, maybe in terms of, the next generation, you are able to give them a much better ecosystem to live in, by virtue of living in a much cleaner, greener environment. Maybe the quality of life improves, and you're able to sort of have X number of benefits which go beyond, right? The idea of a stag is that you have to look at it also in terms of a temporal context. It's not something that gets exhausted like, a rabbit, just in 2 meals, it's over. It's not like that, right? Of course, such a challenge, when posed before a member state in the international community, you have this very lofty ideal of wanting to improve the environment. Not everybody would be willing to cooperate and sign on to that agreement. Why? Because, hunting for the stag is a lot of effort. You want to commit to conserving the environment, but the cost is you have to cut down on manufacturing, and particularly the kind of manufacturing that involves use of non-renewables, particularly the kind of manufacturing that might be dependent on coal or other kinds of fuel. You might have to cut down on a very industrial model of growth and move towards a much cleaner kind of a thing. There are costs involved, right? There are costs involved in that particular transition. In contrast, if I just allow a couple of industries of mine to pollute, what difference does it make? Why should I go on and sign an agreement? It's okay, I'm getting my economic rate of growth for that particular year. Industrial output is this much. My labor stats are also fairly impressive, and so on and so forth, right? So that is the temptation, right? One is the fact that there is a bigger, loftier goal which allows you on a temporal level a much better outcome, but the other is a short-lived kind of a benefit, wherein that if I play around with my industrial stats, then tomorrow maybe I might have to pay the price of a slight slowdown in economic growth because of the readjustment. Maybe after 2 years my economy will take off, and I would sort of get credits for whatever, right, my lower carbon footprint and so on, and also for my reputation costs, etc. But the temptation would be to sort of not get into that picture, right? So I'll close the discussion here, and we'll resume this particular case study of applying stag hunt in the context of the environment or other suitable examples when we meet in our next class, right?